Thank you to the Council, the Chinese Presidency, Ambassador Fu. Good luck in your newest position, Special Coordinator Sigrid Kaag. I would like to offer some thoughts on the immediate challenges and the broader scaffolding required for a better future. Israelis deserve security. Palestinians deserve security. Zero-sum outcomes can never deliver that. An inescapable anchor of this reality is the acknowledgement of the power asymmetry between an occupying, colonizing state and an occupied, colonized people. But more important, before all of that, I want to really express how moving and good it is to see Miss Agmani here, humbling and heartwarming. I, and I'm sure many others, have seen other images of you from different times. Now these times you managed to accompany Prime Minister Netanyahu in Congress. You were on the stage for the inauguration of President Trump. Now here, thankfully safe. Your partner not yet. And it was so important to hear your testimony of an awful experience to which no human should ever be subjected, because it reminds us that at the end of the day, this is about people. Each story deeply personal, your strength in the face of adversity, the thousands upon thousands of stories of individual hardship, Israelis both fallen and still held captive, the tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, many more maimed, starved, lives devastated, schools, hospitals, shelters, entire neighborhoods destroyed, and yet the remarkable resilience also of Palestinians. Dr. Hussam Abu Safir, the director of Kamal Radwan Hospital, still mistreated and held in Israeli detention. One really must not forget the names of the Bibas children, Ariel and Kafir, the circumstances of their death, nor the name of Leila Al-Khatib, a 2-year-old Palestinian killed in her home in the occupied West Bank just days ago while eating dinner with her family, or 5-year-old Hind Rajab, bombed and denied medical attention, dead with her family. Those lost in the turned-off incubators of Al-Shifa Hospital. A minute of silence for each of the Bibas children would be appropriate, as would a minute of silence for each of the more than 18,000 Palestinian children murdered in Israel's devastation of Gaza. That silence would extend to over 300 hours. And our task is to prevent that conflict and that human suffering. And it results from political conflict, preventable tragedies, and the many more tragedies that await if steps are not taken. When you peel back the layers, we are all people and we are all born equal. We can and sometimes should use strong and emotive language, but what we have at the end of the day is rules, is laws, is charters, is conventions, is rights that are codified. Not what is seen in the eye of the beholder, not what is subjective, something that is supposed to, not always, is, be applied and not ignored for some. This body is architect, author, arbiter of those rules and statutes and conventions. And whether it's a non-state actor, a partisan resistance, or a state, the question must always be, are you acting in accordance within those conventions and laws and charters? When Hamas is culpable, it is held accountable, sanctioned heavily. When an ambassador of a state stands at a UN podium with a little shredding machine and shreds the UN Charter, that's a gimmick. But when a state, like Israel, conducts itself in ways that render the Charter meaningless and which assault those conventions, including on genocide, rights, norms and laws that this body holds dear, then that is a challenge that cannot be allowed to pass. It is the kind of affront which decades ago led to apartheid South Africa being suspended from active participation at the UN. The prevention of humanitarian assistance, the targeting of aid workers and even of workers of this institution, all while attacking the bodies that uphold international law, the International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, and claiming the moral high ground while making specious accusations that somehow upholding the law is motivated by anti-Semitism. That worries me because it also cheapens what is a very real and dangerous phenomenon of anti-Semitism. As I have suggested before to this chamber, the absence of accountability, absolute impunity, is a guarantor of perpetual conflict. And I would put it to you that ultimately it does the people of Israel no favors either. I want to offer a very brief checklist of what, in an immediate and more medium term, scaffolding could be on which one could construct peace. The first that has been referred to already is the imperative of maintaining and completing this ceasefire, the release of all the Israelis, your partner included, the exchange of prisoners, the full Israeli military withdrawal, the surging of humanitarian assistance, which should never have been prevented. That requires the parties to implement their commitments. It will require the withheld Palestinian prisoner release to be made good on. It requires the role of the guarantors. There is good reason to fear that this could collapse. There is good reason to fear a resumption of those tragedies, and in particular, a possible renewed attempt to permanently depopulate the north of Gaza. A number of the families of those being held still in Israel, those being held in Gaza, the families in Israel, including some who have been released, have taken to the squares and towns of Israel out of fear that the intention of their own government is not to see this through. 2, the premise for a full ceasefire must learn from history and be based on reality. Hamas non-governance in Gaza is achievable. The movement itself has said so. But no party to a conflict will negotiate its own dissolution unless it is destroyed on the battlefield or unless the root causes of the conflict are addressed. Hamas has not been defeated, and there will be resistance as long as there is the structural violence of occupation and apartheid. It is that simple. 3, a familiar pattern of displacing Palestinians from refugee camps, 40,000 so far, of destroying infrastructure, is being enacted now by Israel in the occupied West Bank. And Israeli government ministers are threatening to annex the territory and make life untenable for Palestinians. This after the ICJ designated the entirety of the occupation as illegal. As we enter the month of Ramadan, there are reasons to be concerned that provocations might intensify in Jerusalem and at Al-Aqsa. In an environment in which ethnic cleansing is openly discussed, we should not be surprised if that thought also comes to the West Bank. 4, attempts to terminate the functioning of UNRWA are an integral part of this pattern. This body should be in no doubt that abruptly imploding UNRWA will contribute to greater insecurity and despair, a greater vacuum, and an escalating social and political crisis. One thing it will not do, though, is change the status of the refugees or negate their rights. 5, one of the most dangerous developments this body must be seized of is the lurch towards zero-sum thinking. Maybe it could be called the Apartheid is not enough camp, whereby the very continued physical presence of Palestinians is something that part of the Israeli polity cannot abide. The unlawful forced displacement of Palestinians must not be endorsed or encouraged by any state, let alone a P5 state. Nothing can be more dangerous for either peoples than the notion that one people will be removed from the land. We know the circumstances under which many Jews came to this area. We know attempts have been made in the past to remove Palestinians. Neither people will be ethnically cleansed nor submitted to genocidal violence. That both people have a permanent home in this land should be a foundational principle. Point 6, given the above, if a commitment to 2 states is to be meaningful, then as you said, the urgency of generating a radically revised incentive structure cannot be exaggerated. I would argue that quite simply it will have to be imposed on the occupying power. And that is the stiff challenge facing the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution and the International Conference due this summer. Partition was the solution bequeathed by this body when there were fewer than 60 members of the UN. 33 states voted for partition in 1947. Much of Africa, Asia, the Caribbean remained under Western colonial rule. In the absence of partition, what we have is a single dominion under an apartheid regime, all in a place where Christians, Jews, and Muslims have lived together in the past. How much longer can we ignore that in that single dominion, the legitimate alternative is the full enfranchisement, equal and democratic rights of all of those within that space? Let me close by saying that I think we do see a surrounding region keen to more actively assist in resolving this, not to normalize with occupation, but to integrate under peace and equality. In the global majority South, we have seen new waves of solidarity and something of the spirit of Bandung of 70 years ago. The launching of the Hague Group just 3 weeks ago takes this solidarity to a new level. Those states committed to something that should be so self-evident, to uphold the rulings of the ICC, the ICJ, of this body when it comes to Palestine. And I urge all law-respecting states to consider joining this group. And globally, we live in an era of multipolarity, which, if I may say, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi some days ago in Munich said equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal rules must be the basic principles to avoid the Pandora's box of the law of the jungle and to avoid zero-sum games and exceptionalism, end quote. Applied to Israelis and Palestinians, it means both peoples are part of the future of this land, not at the expense of each other, but equally deserving the right to live in peace, security, and dignity. Thank you.